A very good evening to all our viewers. Thank you for making time and joining us on the show tonight on the evening review. My name is Toivon Jabela, your host. Tonight we are delving in what has become a very topical issue regarding visa entry requirements into the UK. And to help us unpack the subject is His Excellency the High Commissioner of the UK in Namibia, Charles Moore. Thank you, Ambassador, for making time. I think your statement last week was quite clear, but it's always better to hear from the horse mouth. You said, for example, that this very radical decision was taken because there's been abuse of the system. If you can expound on that a little bit.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me, Toivo. It's actually a really good opportunity to expand on this, because when you put out a press notice,
Yes.
it never contains as much information as people actually
Absolutely,
need.
yes.
So, we've for many years enjoyed having a visa-free access for Namibian nationals, because it's enabled many hundreds of Namibians to visit the UK and for tourism or for business. In the last couple of years, in the last few years, we've seen a significant increase, and quite an unsustainable increase in the number of Namibian nationals who arrive in the UK without a visa, which is perfectly legal, and claim asylum. And anecdotal evidence suggests that they are claiming asylum not because there is persecution or because there is famine or conflict or anything that they are fleeing from, but because they are looking for a job. It's economic migrancy. And on one level, that's perfectly understandable, because we recognise the dire situation of unemployment and poverty in Namibia. However, the asylum system globally exists to give sanctuary to people whose lives are in danger. People whose governments persecute them for their religious beliefs or for their sexual orientation or whatever it is. Those conditions don't exist in Namibia. And Namibia is a safe, stable, democratic country. Its citizens are not at risk of persecution or arbitrary imprisonment or execution or all of those issues. And so claiming asylum from a country like Namibia is actually immoral, I think, but also wrong. But it also imposes a huge problem for us, because when somebody claims asylum, we let them in, and we have to we go through every application with all sincerity, because that's the only fair way to do it. But when we find that over 90% of Namibian applications are refused, then they have to leave the country, and all of this is a burden on our system. So it's been unfortunate, because I apologise to all those hundreds of Namibians who travel to the UK legitimately and observe our immigration rules, because they are the ones who effectively are now having to have an extra cost and an extra bureaucracy to visit the UK. But we have to find a way to stop the numbers of asylum seekers that we've had.
And I suppose asylum seekers, if anyone was approved through that system, there are certain provisions that your government makes for people like that, in terms of where to resettle them and maybe providing some basic necessities. Is that sort of what you're referring to when you're talking about the burden?
Yeah, well, anybody who arrives in the UK and claims asylum, we can't say, I'm sorry, you're from Namibia, that's a safe country, go back. We have to allow them in, because we have to listen to their claim. We have to study their claim. And because of the sheer number of asylum seekers that we have in the UK from many, many countries all around the world, I mean, a lot of Albanians, Iraqis, so many countries that are suffering. We have huge numbers of asylum seekers, and therefore we have to give them each the same time in considering their applications. And during that process, which now takes between a year and 18 months to determine an application, obviously we have to support them. We have to make sure that they have shelter, that they have access to some employment. We have to make sure they have housing. And that's where the burden is. The UK government at the moment is spending something like £6 million a day on accommodation for asylum seekers.
That's a huge number. There's a Namibian business person, Lazarus Jacobs, who was speaking on one of the South African TV stations, I think over the weekend or so. And one of the things that he said on that show was that the UK, being the UK, ought to have a more sophisticated vetting system. And he felt that the country would have, your government should have exhausted other avenues as a sophisticated country like yours, instead of slamming doors on Namibians. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, first of all, we're not slamming doors. I mean, actually, we're keeping the doors wide open.
Yeah.
But it's just that you have to pay for entry now rather than arriving visa free. And I suppose UK has become over the past decade or so, it's been a sort of country of choice for asylum seekers, whether that is because of the employment conditions, whether it's because of the language. Maybe people feel more comfortable speaking English than they might speaking German or French or one of the other languages. We've become a sort of destination of choice.
Yeah.
And whilst that is not unreasonable at all for people fleeing from war-torn countries and countries with very difficult conditions and persecution, it is unreasonable for countries where no such conditions exist.
Yeah.
So our process for asylum is as respectful to the international laws as Namibia's are. Mm-hmm. We're not doing anything actually different to Namibia by imposing this visa regime, and actually we're one of the few countries amongst your international partners that didn't have a visa regime. Yeah. So the US, Canada, EU, China, Russia, Venezuela, you've needed visas for those countries for many years. Yeah. And the UK in that regard has been an exception. And that's partly the reason, because people have chosen the UK because they can travel there legally, because they can turn up at the border and then claim asylum, yeah, which they can't do in other countries because there's the extra scrutiny of a visa process. So actually, I think the visa process will help because you'll have been aware, I think, over the past year at least, there's been more scrutiny or unofficial scrutiny at the airport, Haseo Kotako, yeah, of Namibian nationals. And they turn up at the desk to check in and they're asked, where's their bank statement? Where's their proof that they're going to return? What job have they got? And these are all questions asked by the airline because they want to be sure that they're genuine travelers. But it's not a visa interview. It's not a scrutiny from immigration. And many people have been kicked off flights because the airlines didn't believe that they were genuine visitors. Yeah. And that's actually not right, because the airline shouldn't. I mean, they take the commercial responsibility of flying them, but actually the airline is not an immigration officer. Yeah. So having a visa means that there will be a much more of a guarantee that you'll be allowed onto a flight. It doesn't necessarily guarantee you entry, like the immigration officer decides that. Yeah, yeah. But actually it should give you that peace of mind that once you have a visa, and you can get a visa for 1 year, for 10 years, 5 years, so you only have to apply once if you're a regular visitor. Yeah. Should be helpful.
Yeah, and I understand that. So a decision like that, His Excellency, where is it made? Is it made locally, or do you get a message from London saying, yeah, look, we are having this influx and we want you to help us?
Well, it's definitely not made locally. This is something that we do centrally in London. It happens, it's an ongoing process all around the world. Every year we look at migration patterns, people coming to the UK. And where there are some concerns, then they follow them and take a judgment then on whether the application of a visa regime is necessary. That's the case for Namibia, where from 2016 we had 27 asylum claims. Yeah. In 2022 that was 651, and in the first 3 months of this year it was 382. So that was going to easily double last year's total. Yeah, yeah. We also applied a visa regime in Honduras for the same reason. Last year, we applied a visa regime in El Salvador because they had the highest numbers of people seeking asylum from non-visa countries. And it was unfortunate. Namibia had taken that top spot. It was the country where we were getting more asylum claims from any other country who didn't require a visa. And so it was almost an inevitable process.
Yeah.
And we actually looked at all avenues before imposing the visa regime. Was there anything we could do? Could we? And we were discussing it regularly with the Namibian government, both here and in the High Commission in London. But you can't stop. The only thing we could have done was to stop people travelling, which isn't right. We couldn't work with the Namibian government to check all visitors going to the UK.
Yeah.
That wouldn't be right. It would be an imposition of their freedoms.
Yeah.
So the only way to do it was actually to cause a bit of pain for those genuine visitors who abide by the rules, in order to prevent the increase of non-genuine visitors.
Yeah. Before you go on a break, His Excellency, you spoke about, in fact, that was going to be my next question, and that is about whether there's been any conversations between the two governments to say, look, we have this crisis soaring in our system, and because the announcement last week was pretty surprising.
Yeah.
But internally, there's been any conversations with the...
Yeah, we've been talking about it. I mean, over the past year, I've expressed concern and also in the media about the rising number of asylum claimants. And obviously, we talk regularly with the government, and we discuss these issues. But it's an important point, actually, that we must make clear that there is absolutely no responsibility attached to the Namibian government about this. This is not something that we're punishing Namibia for as a country.
Yeah.
It is border security and trying to prevent the number of asylum seekers that are coming from here.
Yeah, wonderful. We go for a quick break and then return with Ambassador His Excellency Moore.
eTicket, your online ticket solution for events and event marketing, bringing you ease of mind and making sure that your event gets out there. For more information, contact events@nmh.com.na.
Our conversation with the High Commissioner continues. Now, in your deliberations with the Namibian government, what has been the attitude of the Namibian government towards this issue? Did they understand where you were coming from with this issue? Or what was the general attitude of the government?
Yeah, no, I mean, they do understand the issue. I think it's understandable that there is very high unemployment in Namibia, and people are trying to do what they can to improve their economic circumstances, and I think it's for that reason they're looking at every avenue, but it's not something that the Namibian government can prevent or even assist them with. So I think they understand the reasons why we need to work to stop this.
Yeah. I'm asking because immediately, I think later in the day after your statement last week, the very same day, the Minister of International Relations issued a statement saying that Cabinet has put together a committee that is investigating these measures, as if they were caught by surprise, or it came across as that.
Yeah, well, and they're not caught by surprise, because I mean we have been keeping in touch with it. We didn't give them too much advance notice. We gave them as much notice because we're obliged to wait until the legislation is actually laid in the UK before we can confirm. But the announcement of immediate imposition is standard practice, because we don't want to allow a window, which would be quite confusing, a window for many hundreds of people to suddenly buy flight tickets to travel to the UK. And you know, the establishment of a cabinet committee, I see that as actually quite a positive thing, because it shows that that Namibia cares, and it shows the importance of the relationship. If the relationship wasn't important, then Namibia wouldn't really care if we imposed a visa regime too deeply. So I think that's actually quite important.
Yeah. And in terms of, I mean, at Namibian Sun, we ran an article the next morning that we were speaking to some sources within government who were saying they are investigating the possibility of reciprocating the same. Is that a welcome move if they were to say, look, we then, like we use the term, paying you in your own coin?
Of course, you know, this is it's absolutely within Namibia's right to consider that. You know, we imposed a visa regime for a specific circumstance to address a specific problem. That same problem doesn't exist on the other side. We have maybe 30,000 British nationals who come to this beautiful country every year for tourism and for business, and they abide by the rules. And when they don't abide by the rules, it's absolutely right that Namibia takes action as well, as they do. We had one citizen last year who overstayed their visa. They were arrested and deported because they'd broken the immigration rules. So we both work in the same way. So it's absolutely Namibia's right to consider whether they want to reciprocate. All I would say is that, you know, you need visas for 127 countries as a Namibian, and that includes all your international partners like Germany and EU, US, China, Russia, and there's no reciprocation on those countries for visa regimes. So I think it's entirely up to the Namibian government how they want to respond.
One of the issues one of the reasons that has been probably the biggest one that has been used a lot of times, not very genuinely or sincerely, is that of people claiming to be of sexual minority nature and that they're persecuted and stuff like that, which of course, like you stated in your introductory remarks, is not true historically. But we are in a moment now where this subject of same-sex marriages and gay rights has taken the national discourse to another level. Is the UK monitoring this situation, the current discourse, especially the propositions that are being made in Parliament now? One of them that worries me personally a lot is where government seem to, those that brought this bill are talking about preventing the propagating and advocating for these rights, that if it goes through and the president signs it into a law, that you will have probably more people coming to you saying, look, this is the problem that we have now.
I mean, it's actually a point which I hadn't thought of, but you're right. We do monitor these situations all around the world, and there's been a growing debate in Africa in the past few months. I mean, not least following the Uganda legislation, there's been a growing debate about freedoms. At this time, we're absolutely confident that that the freedoms exist in Namibia. There's a lack of persecution for the LGBT community. If that changes, then you're right that there may then be a more valid reason for people to claim asylum in a place like the UK. But that would be on a par with anywhere else in the world. That when their asylum application is assessed, we would take a view at that stage as to whether there's any credibility in the claim. So if somebody claimed that they were persecuted for being LGBT, we would assess it at the time.
Yeah, I know that you've been quite frank in your views about those rights. I remember a few months ago when the executive director of the Ministry of Information had to also answer to some of your assertions on Twitter. What can you say within the domain that you can, to what extent, to whatever extent you can about, because if these clauses were to be passed, it would mean actually that in practical terms there are freedom of expression rights being taken away from people. If I'm found with a banner saying legalize same-sex marriages, according to that clause, I would actually go to jail. Do you have any view on that?
Well, look, I mean, it's not for me to get involved in Namibian politics. I follow them. I've been very vocal. I support all freedoms and equalities. So not just on LGBT, but I mean all freedoms and equalities.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I love about this country is that the Constitution guarantees freedoms and equalities for all its citizens, and I think that's wonderful. If the Parliament decides to change the law, that's entirely within the right of the Parliament, and it wouldn't be for me to comment on that. It might impact on us if it generated refugees from this country because they were fleeing active persecution rather than supposed persecution. Then that changes things as far as this is concerned. But no, I mean absolutely. And I'm very happy. I think we are either in the public service, in the limelight, or even as individuals. If we get something wrong, we should say so. Yeah. And I got that tweet wrong. I was premature in what I posted, and that's why I deleted it straight away, because it caused some inadvertently it caused some offence. Totally unintentional, but you learn the lesson. And so I retracted that. So that issue has passed. But I mean, I'm always a supporter of any freedoms and equalities.
Yeah. In conclusion, High Commissioner, in light of all these developments, what assurances can you give our viewers and everybody watching about the UK-Namibia relations, despite all this?
Yeah. Well, I think, despite all this, I think it's actually really important to say that this isn't a political move. This isn't a judgment about Namibia. It's not a judgment about Namibia's politics. It's not a judgment actually on our relationship with Namibia. In the same way that the US, you need a visa for the US, it's not a judgment on your relationship with them. We have the greatest of relationships with the US, and we need visas for the US. So the visa issue it can be very emotive, but it's more of a practical way of protecting borders and securing your borders, which are more important nowadays with so much international travel. So, you know, I would try to take some of the negativity out of this. I think actually applying for a visa, whilst it will be expensive, more expensive than people would like, whilst it's more bureaucratic than people would like, actually I think it gives you slightly more comfort and assurance of being able to access the UK and to enjoy that relationship that we've always had. So, you know, I hope there won't be any sort of negative impact on our relationship. And you know, we're working together to try and actually increase trade and tourism in both directions. And that's what I'm putting a lot of effort into nowadays.
Absolutely. Thank you, His Excellency, for making time. I think what we in the media appreciate about you is that you're always accessible. A classic example is today I spoke to your office only today to say whether you were available, and you showed up, which is very, very important for us that you are able to come and explain some of these things. So thank you very much for making time.
Always happy to. Thank you so much.
Yeah, that's Charles Moore. He's the High Commissioner for the UK in Namibia, explaining that decision last week where his country decided to impose visa requirements for Namibians traveling to the UK. Thank you for watching.